Hello and welcome to the fourth installment of 3 critical questions you must ask. Today what I want to talk to you about is the very next question, which is, what are we creating? In any type of project, okay, no matter what you're building and no matter what the size of the organization is, okay, whether it's a small startup, with just a couple people, whether it's a mid-sized organization or a large enterprise organization where there are 30 plus people involved, the most critical thing that you have to do is make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what actually is going to be built. Okay, we've got this idea. We've made some determinations, as we talked about in the last video, about what's important and what's feasible. Okay, we've decided what's worth doing. At the same time, what has to happen next is that every single person involved has to share an understanding of how this is all going to manifest itself into the actual product. When everyone is not on the same page, the end result satisfies nobody. Users aren't happy and the business isn't happy because the value that they expected to come back never materializes. Also, projects get derailed because the development process is fraught with uncertainty and surprises. Because not everybody fully understood what was going to happen here, questions keep coming up. Well, I thought we were going to, wasn't this screen going to include this information, or wasn't this workflow going to work like this, or I thought we were, okay, these kinds of things, these cycles. That happens when not everyone is on the same page, and I'm sure that some of you have experienced this. There is a very old story that predates UX and digital design and development and programming and all these things. There's an example that's been around for a very long time about what happens when there's a disconnected understanding on a product team of any kind. And I want to illustrate that for you. Number one, because it's funny, and number two, because I am certain that a lot of you will be nodding your head in agreement. Okay, the story goes like this. A project starts with how the client explains it to a project manager or to a small team of people. Okay, so this is what the client explained that they wanted. Here is how the salesperson understood it. Here's how the project manager understood it. Here's how the designer designed it. This is how the developer coded it. And this is what the client really wanted in the first place. Do you see what's happening there? Now, this is, it's an extreme way of telling a story, but this happens a lot. It's very easy for people to walk away from the table thinking oranges when the conversation was really about apples. The reason for that is because we all have our own language. And I don't just mean our native dialect, right? The language that we speak. I mean the words that we use to describe things, okay? The mental images and associations that come to mind when you say things are not always shared. For example, if I say we're going to build a messaging system, right? Our application needs a place where customers can talk to support and they can leave messages. A lot of times, and I've been in these discussions, the discussion doesn't go beyond that. We say, okay, we need some basic messaging. It'll sort of work like, email, sort of like Outlook, and there'll be a high level of customers need to submit stuff. We need to be able to answer back. There's a much deeper discussion that almost never happens. All right, so when a customer submits an email, who gets notification that that's happened? Does the system store that information, or is it just email to email and we're just facilitating communication? What happens when somebody responds to that query? Are we tracking that response in some way so that the system and this department knows that it was addressed? Do we have to assign numbers to these cases? Do we have to assign case numbers? Do we have to track it? Do there have to be threaded conversations? Does someone need to be able to forward those conversations to somebody else? Do you see what I'm getting at? There's a level of depth that almost never gets touched because everyone just sort of assumes that everyone knows what everyone else is talking about. I'll give you another example. there may be sign-on processes, right, in a B2B organization. Now, in some cases, the person signing on to the system may be an end customer. It may be a service rep who is operating on behalf of a third party that's buying our services. It may be a support specialist who needs to authenticate with the system in order to be able to use it. What often happens in conversations is people only go as far as saying the sign-on process. Well, okay, which sign-on process are we talking about? For which person? For which one of these parties? And if you have more than 3 groups of users, there's a lot of confusion in the room. But I can tell you again, over the last 30 years, almost 30 years, I've been part of a lot of conversations where that specificity doesn't happen. People say, well, during the sign-on process, and I am usually the guy who's saying, well, wait a minute, which sign-on process are we talking about? Let's not keep saying this term because it's too generic, it's not specific enough. Anyway, that's how these types of disconnects happen. So there's confusion about specifications, there's confusion about requirements, there's confusion about what exactly the feature set is going to be. The other reason that happens is because with the rise of lean and agile, like any other approach, there are misunderstandings about what that really means. For instance, I've met an awful lot of folks who believe that agile means no documentation whatsoever, right? That we should just go ahead, let's iterate and we build and we don't have to document all this stuff. Absolutely patently false. Some of the large organizations that I work with that are religious about agile and iterative practices create a great deal of documentation. They do not create novel length specifications, but they absolutely document everything. They capture it simply to make sure that every single person involved understands fully what is happening, how it's going to happen, and what exactly we're creating. Okay, it's very, very important. Doesn't matter how you share that information. It can be a Word document, it can be in a project management program, it could be in a SharePoint system, it can be on a whiteboard that somebody takes a picture of. It doesn't matter, but you have to share that information because if you don't, you're inviting the kind of misunderstanding that exists in the story I just told you. It happens a lot, and this is why. The next thing I want to talk to you about is there also has to be a shared understanding of what model this product is going to follow, okay, or what model this proposed update or feature change or whatever it is going to follow. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Alan Cooper wrote a great book. It's called About Face. It's about interaction design. And in it, he talks about the difference between what's called an implementation model and a user's mental model. Okay, and here's how this works. I'm going to illustrate it for you. The implementation model is essentially based on the system. It's based on technology. It's based on functionality. This is a pure technical conversation. Here are the collection of features and functions that need to be built. On the other end of the scale, you have what's called a mental model, and that is specific to the human beings who will be using the product. A mental model is built from every association we have as humans about how something is going to work. With just about anything you pick up, whether it's a video camera or your smartphone or any type of new product, just by looking at it, you have certain ideas about how this thing is going to work, right? Just simply because you've used a lot of things at this point in your life, and you kind of know, all right, this is probably how this works. Most people don't read instructions before they use something. They just sort of pick it up and start using it. Some people don't, but the majority of us make assumptions automatically based on our experiences. That's what a mental model is. Okay? It's how we expect something to work. In between those two extremes is what's called the represented model. This is what design and development actually creates, and that's the topic of what we're talking about here. This is what we're building. Here's the deal. The closer the representative model is to the mental model, the more useful it is. The more easily understandable it is, the more likely someone will actually use it, the more likely that they will actually be able to understand it, the more likely that they will be able to get value out of it, that it'll be meaningful. Why? Because it speaks to them in a language that they understand, okay? From visual associations that are made in the user interface, to the steps in the workflow, to the actual functionality of how information goes in and comes back out. It matches their expectation and understanding of how this all works. That is a huge part of positive user experience. What I say often is that the job of UX, essentially, at its core, and design as a whole, all right, as a holistic pursuit, the job of both of those things is to match expectation with experience, right? The closer our experience with something is to our prediction about how it's going to work and what's going to happen next, the more likely we are to be comfortable using it, we feel safe, we feel in control, and we're more likely to go down the path, okay? So that's the first part of this idea of what are we creating. Again, you have got to get everybody on the same page, first and foremost. And then you have to make sure that everybody understands what is being built in terms of what's the distance between the implementation model and a user's mental model, and where are we landing. If not in the end product, right now, in this sprint, for our first beta release, minimum viable product, whatever it is, you want to know where you're falling in this scale. And you also want to know that if you're falling in the middle somewhere, that's okay, that it's enough right now to deliver value, right? Remember from our last video, value, 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 importance, feasibility, okay? I'm going to stop there because there's more to what are we creating. We're going to dig into that next time. Specifically, we're going to talk about stakeholders and who needs to be at the table and what needs to happen during those discussions. In the meantime, I invite and encourage you to check out my website, givegoodux.com. You will find a wealth of articles and advice and downloadable tools and all sorts of other things that I think will help you in your pursuits of all things UX. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not once again mention that I have a new book called Think First that is all about user experience product strategy. It dives much deeper into the things that we've talked about today. And I hope you will check it out. Until next time, give good UX.